Hello. In this video we start chapter 6. This would be the part 1 of chapter 6, and chapter 6 is actually one of the most important chapters for studying macroeconomics. If you remember that we said there are three major phenomena or concerns or problems which in macroeconomics we try to basically understand and explain, and the number one was aggregate output, right? Aggregate output. And then it helps us to measure its growth rate. Okay, its growth rate. But we need to have a measure for aggregate output before we can calculate its growth. So there are several indicators. So this is actually a measure of the performance. A measure for performance for macro economy performance. So if the profit is the measure of performance of a company, or satisfaction or happiness is a measure of performance of a family, the aggregate output is a good indicator for measure of performance. And later we are gonna basically criticize it. Remember, this is going to the fact that if we use the linear flow diagram again, we have the production, which is using scarce resources, labor, capital, and other resources, and then it's basically supplying them to the consumers, household or families, and the consumers are using to this is a little bit unknown wealth or happiness, or the amount or the things which we want. So the performance would be measured, the proper performance won't be aggregate output, but should be the aggregate happiness or the well-being. So that is the economy is performing well if the well-being is maximized. So maximization of this subject to constraint we are facing here is an indication. The higher the better. But actually this is a little bit difficult to measure, and instead we are using the production which is coming out from the production, and let's say this one is called aggregate output. So all the goods and services which are produced by the firms, and these are families. Let's call this one Y and this one W, okay? So we would say that the W is a function of Y, and the coefficient is positive. So the more of this is leading to more of happiness. But it is measurable because we know the commodities produced by the firms. We see the magnitude of the production. So we better find a measure for aggregate output. So it's showing the size of the performance. The higher the output, most probably will lead to the higher happiness as well. So this is just a proxy measure for happiness. We know there are some problems, and in this chapter we are going to talk about this issue that this function is not necessarily true, is not one-to-one. You may have lots of production and income, or instead of saying production you may actually say income, okay, aggregate income. But having money is not necessarily leads to the happiness. So there are alternative ways for let's say human development index or index of happiness, or the United Nations actually every year is releasing a report of happiness, world happiness, the report for world happiness, and then they capture which countries are happier, and usually the Scandinavian countries are sitting on the top of the list, and Scandinavian countries are not having the highest amount of aggregate output or income. It is other factors which makes them happier. Perhaps it's social support, perhaps it's the literacy and their health system, etc., etc. Okay, so in this chapter we first start, because this is measurable, and this is difficult to be measured, but we have some ways of measuring. But all these things came recently, not when the issue was raised in the beginning of the 20th century. They came up with the idea of measuring the aggregate output. Okay, for the aggregate output or aggregate income, several measures are introduced. For example, one is called gross domestic product, or net domestic product, and gross national product, or net national product, and if not product, income, gross national income versus net national income, which these two is supposed to be identical. If production is being measured by the value and the income is also value of the money people are receiving, it appears that they should be equal. But there are some differences between the other measures. The starting point is to start with GDP. So in this chapter, we first start telling you what is the so-called gross domestic product. And of course, we will find the way of gross domestic product. What is this one? Net domestic product. What is this one? Gross national product. What is this one? Net national product. Gross national income, net national income. So what is the net versus growth, net versus growth, and domestic versus the domestic versus national. So if we can find and understand the differences, then we would have a better measure for the size of the cake which the economy is producing, and the bigger is the notion of maximize. So it's the better performance. The higher of the aggregate output, given the resources are limited or scarce, then we are performing better. So that is why we are interested on understanding and measuring the aggregate output, and then we would make effort to understand why it is changing, why it is going upward or downward, so that its growth as a phenomena as a macroeconomic phenomena can be explained. So this is what we want to do in this chapter, and it's one of the fascinating chapters which most students like it interesting, and it is the gateway to the macroeconomics. So the learning objectives of this chapter is, at first we will explain the GDP. So we are going to explain the GDP. And we will define it. We will describe the GDP's fundamental and differential between GDP and GNP and other measures which I just mentioned. So we would say that in the second learning objective, we would explain that there are different methods of measuring the GDP. In fact, there are 3 ways, but the books often are calling it two ways. And I'm going to explain that why they say it 2 ways. One is by measuring how much people are spending. So it's called expenditure method versus the income method. The third way is called the value added approach. This is also another way of measuring the aggregate output. So we are explaining the value added, but generally speaking, they said it's like a mathematical formula which you can reach the solution in different ways. Okay, so that is the different methods which we calculate the aggregate output, namely the gross domestic product. And as if it's not finished, the moment we invent how to measure the aggregate output, we start criticizing it, that what is the shortcoming of it. And immediately we will find out that what we are measuring is called the nominal GDP, and it's not going to help us to measure the growth, because we are measuring this to say that what is the growth rate of aggregate output. And then if you want to calculate the growth rate, the best way to use is the real GDP, not the nominal GDP. So we are making a distinction between nominal and real GDP. Why nominal GDP is not useful, so we will learn about it. And we invent another thing called real GDP, which helps us to measure the growth rate of an economy. And then, as I told you, the reason that we invented the GDP or aggregate output measure for performance is that we are using the scarce resources to the best possible manner. And the best possible manner is to have the highest well-being for other people. Well-being should be. But is the GDP is leading? Economists are saying, yeah, GDP to a large extent is representing the well-being. But actually there are several shortcomings. So we're going to explain about the limitations of the GDP concept for capturing the well-being of a nation or a country. Okay, so these are the major foreign learning objectives. So by finishing this chapter, you would basically know all these things. You can answer these concepts very well. So let's say that where we started and where the measurement of the GDP became. As I in part 3 of chapter 5 I explained historical background. If in fact it was in the 1945 onward which the macroeconomics started to shape, and at this year they realized that actually they have no measure, they have no measure for macro variables. And if you remember, I said that 1944 or 45, this organization, United Nations, was formed, World Bank was formed, and the International Monetary Fund was formed. So these are new organizations or institutions which is sort of the government of the world, but they are not the government of the world, actually. The humanity wish that they were, because we have 5 nations which can always be above these institutions and do whatever they want. They can veto the votes of every other countries. You know, the Recep Tayyip Erdogan has a big statement saying that the world is not 5, and that he's referring to this veto right of those big powers, and that these institutions are not government of the world. If a country needs a government to manage, why not the world needs a government? And in fact, John Maynard Keynes and other economists formed this, hoping that they are gonna be acting as the government of the world. But what I want to say is that the World Bank actually assigned a job to prominent economist Richard Stone and Simon Kuznets. Simon Kuznets won the Nobel Prize also in economics. These two came up with the idea of national accounting system. National accounting system, okay? System. So they developed a platform similar to accounting of a company, but the data needs to be aggregated and collected from everyone, and then they developed the notion of the GDP. Okay, so the GDP came at the same time. By the end of the World War, it was created. In the United States, the organization which is doing this is called BEA, or Bureau of Economic Analysis. Each country has their own. Like in Iran, it's Markaz Amar, or Statistical Center. In Australia, it's Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABA. And each country has their own institutions. In Oman is also measured by the Statistical Center. And so national income or national product accounts, it's a way that we collect the data with a view to capture the overall performance of an economy. And there are literally thousands of variables used to measure the aggregate output, namely GDP or GNP. But we are reducing it to the most important one in this chapter with a view to basically simplify it and make it understandable for freshman students in economics. So what is gross domestic product? So the question is that what is gross? So I said that the starting point is with the GDP. So we are going to explain first GDP, or gross domestic product. And each of these words, it's an acronym. It's an acronym. Acronym means you take the first word and then you make it a gross domestic product. Like, you know, many acronyms like we will see economists are using acronyms very often, like World Bank, UN, United Nations, International Monetary Fund. These are acronyms. So you pick up the first letter of an expression or a concept, and then you create a jargon or an expression which is very well known. So acronym means that. And there is an acronym dictionary also. So you type GDP and it will says maybe there would be other acronyms with the GDP. Some students quickly make it with GPA. The GPA is basically for the overall grade of the students, right? GDP is also an acronym. Okay, what is it? In the first slide, I put the definition. So this is the definition of the gross domestic product. How can I make it here? Yes. So if you want to basically know a definition, you have to pick up the keywords. The keywords here is gross domestic product in the acronym, but in the definition, let's see what it is. So I already told you that the total production is the GDP. So all the things which the firms are producing is going to be the GDP. And in the definition, that is also the same. So I pick up my red pen and to underline the words which are key in this definition. GDP is the total market value of a country's, so can be Oman, can be United States, a country's output. So it is the total market value of a country's, it is the market value again of all final goods and services. So I will write it here. First of all, it's market value. Second of all, it's final goods and services, which are produced within a given period. So given a time period, and within a country, so inside a country. Okay, so a country is very important, a country, within a country. So these are the keywords, and without knowing what are these things, you cannot, I would put the final here, final goods and services. So let's do first the last two things, given a period of time and inside a country. These are easier, and then we are gonna explain these two in further details. So when we say given a period of time, it can be a year, and this year usually is financial year. So a financial year in Oman starts 1st of January to 30th or 31st of December. Okay, so this is in Iran, financial year starts 21st of March. You may say, why this is like that? And it's end on 20th of March next year. In Australia, it starts from the 1st of July and ends 30th of June next year. So these are next year. Or the financial year maybe can be break it down to seasons or quarters. Okay, quarters. Or month. Or weeks. Or before weeks is fortnights, 2 weeks. And then weeks and days. Are we measuring the aggregate output in 1 day? No, usually it's basically either the quarter or the year. So this is a period of time. It's how much production is. So it's a flow. It's flowing amount of output which is produced. This is the total magnitude of the energy encapsulated in goods and services within a year. So we are using the energy of land, labor, capital, and can we create the highest available energy for our happiness, to be used for our happiness? So it's a measure of performance of the economy given a period of time. So the period of time is without period of time, we don't know. Is it from the birth of the Christ up to now? No, it is from today till the next year, to the same day, something like that. So that is dealing with the given period of time. And inside the country, it means that we are asking all producers inside a country. So part of them might be foreigners who are inside the country. And some of our facts, so if it is factors of production, land, capital, and resources, Omani, we are not taking care of this. How much Omani factors of production are making production? This is not the case. We are knowing that there are some factors of production which are foreigners, and they are producing inside Oman. Inside Oman. So whoever Omani inside the country and the foreigners inside the country, how much they are producing. So if this is the map, let's say this is the box which shows the map of the country, okay? And some of these firms, I use the blue cross. The blue cross are the citizens. So these are Omanis. And I use the green for the foreigners who are producing here. Land, labor, capital of other countries. So non-Omanis. Okay? We don't care whether it is Omani or non-Omani. We are caring that they are producing inside the country. So we have some Omanis. This is another country. So this is country Oman. And this is India. Okay? We have some Omanis who are producing inside Oman. Let's say we have a refinery which is in port of Bombay, and then our experts and our money goes there, and there are some actually Indians who are working there also. Okay, so we may get the capital there and the crude oil there, which is ours, is our factors of production, but Indian workers are working, so it's a joint venture, similar to the company which is Omani, non-Omani, but is working here, and it is creating production here. So this D in the GDP, domestic, gross domestic, is related to the inside the country. So when we say that GDP, this D means inside the country. If we use GNP, then it's different. It's gonna be whatever it's produced by Omani. So we collect this up. Let me use a red. So I am adding this to this to this to this, and I'm excluding those green ones. And not only this, the one which we are producing. So the GNP is the total of this X, which is inside and outside the country, whereas the GDP is the summation of X's inside plus the other color X's inside. So these are inside the country, inside. So if we do it this way, we are gonna, you might say, oh, how can we basically account it? Don't worry, we're gonna teach you how we're doing it. So N stands for national and D stands for domestic. And then we're going to explain the difference between G and N later. N for net and G for gross. So this is taking care of two things. The easy one. But the other two are not that easy to explain. Why do we choose market value? Market value. Why non-market value? So basically, we are saying that the GDP, by the definition, I will write it here, GDP, is the total summation. So this was just mocking, but I'm now making it more accurate. So it is a market value. It means that we have a price and we have a quantity, okay? And we have so many products, milk, rice, oil, steel. N products is produced inside the country, okay? N. So I goes from 1 to N, and we give the superscript here as this. So the total market value, so this is the market price, and these are the quantities, okay? And the reason is that actually we are unable to define the GDP as the total summation of Q's. I goes from 1 to N. This is impossible. This is not possible. Impossible. The reason is that Q consists of rice, milk, oil, you name it, taxi, house. They have different units. Units are different. One is kilogram, another one is liter, and it's apple and orange. Apple and orange. Even if both are measured by kg, they are different. So we cannot say that, okay, 1 kilo apple, 1 kilo orange, let's top them up. This is wrong. This is wrong because they are two different things. And this summation is impossible. But if we multiply by their values, by their prices, this is dollar, and the dollar value of apple can be topped with the dollar. So same unit. We need a same unit, and that is the Omani Real or the dollar. So the notion of the money immediately jump in, because it is impossible to add apple and orange, the quantities. Quantities have different natures. Perhaps the best way was to add the energy content of them. And some may say that if we are picking up a correct unit of value, actually that value would be very likely to be the energy content. So GDP is the total energy content of all final goods and services produced within a country. So this is the way that to market value is come to help. Why market value? You may say that, okay, I have a Rolex which my grandfather gave me, watch. This is like maybe 70 years old. And this is priceless for me. This is priceless. I'm not gonna basically sell this. This is like my collection, which my grandfather gave me to my father, and my father gave it to me. This is basically very precious for me. But it doesn't make sense, the valuation like that. It should not be the willingness to pay or willingness to receive of the buyers and sellers, because we have so many people with different valuation system. Maybe this Rolex watch, which your friend actually, even if you give it for free, he don't like it. Okay, so because he has no willingness to get it. So here the market comes to market value. So the moment you decide to sell it, it is demand and supply, and it determines that what is the value of that goods or service, not only for you but for the entire community. So it's the market value is a best way to measure these quantities, or the identify how to measure it. So the GDP, I write it again, the GDP is gonna be the market price multiplied by the quantity, and sum it also, because they are in the same unit of monetary unit, they are summable. So we are able to make an aggregate value of everything which a country is producing. But wait a second. The last thing which is left is the keyword is the final goods and services. We cannot say all goods and services. So I put in the definition another, it should be final goods and services. So not total or all goods and services. Only final ones. So what is this final which is inside the definition? So final is versus, so if we have quantity final, there are some quantities which is intermediate, I use the I, which together makes the quantity total. For example, we buy a car, and inside the car there are 4 + 1 wheels or tires. Okay, tires. So if I say that I bought a car, I am also buying five tires with it. So the tires which has been used to produce the car, they are intermediate. But the tires, when you go to a repair shop to change your old tires and put the new one, they are the final tires. They are not the intermediate. Okay, but if I go to the tire factory, it would tell me that how much total they have produced. they don't tell me that how much they have sold. This has been sold to the cars, sold to car manufacturing. So these are the ones which is used in the car, and these are which are sold in repair shop. So there's a big problem here. When you're measuring the GDP, you have to use this. These are going to end users. Okay? End users usually families. Usually families or households. Okay? So the final goods and services which is produced by the end users, should be counted in the GDP, not the total one. So it is specifically mentioned. The reason is the following, that the intermediate one, and then I go and ask that how much car is being used. So we have final cars, we have quantity intermediate cars, and we have quantity of cars total. So what is the example of the final cars? These are coming by the end users. Like you are buying a car and using it for yourself. But this is the car which is bought by a taxi driver. So he's giving service of the transportation. So this is basically not end user. If you are catching a taxi, you are not gonna basically use up the car, the taxi which the taxi driver is using it. Okay, so that is the intermediate. And the total car, if I go to the car factory and say how much car you have produced, it's gonna give me the total one. So it's my task to separate how many of the cars is being used as the intermediate, how many of them is being used as the final. The one which goes to the end user must be counted in the GDP. So here there's a big problem. Big problem. And it's separation of final versus intermediate is not easy. But Simon Kuznets and the Richard Stone find a solution for this, and that solution is called value added approach. Value added. So we are gonna tell you that how the value added comes to avoid the double counting. If we are using the total cars and total tires, the GDP is gonna be larger because we are repeating the count. Once the value of the tires inside the new car we purchase, the value of the tires which is being used. So in order to avoid multiple counting or double counting, to avoid double counting problem, double counting. So if you can remove the intermediate, you are not double counting. You truly saying that all the things you have measured is the value of the final goods and services. Another example which we can say is that oil is we are drilling and we bring crude oil. Okay, and then the crude oil goes to the refinery and it will gives you the petroleum products, including gasoline, which we are using in our cars. Okay, and the petroleum products goes to shipment by the trucks or by the pipeline to the petrol station. So here is the is selling the petroleum product to gas station, and the petroleum product is then the gas station is selling it to the consumers. So you and me go and fill the petroleum products from the gas station. We don't go to the oil well and say, give me my because they are producing crude oil. Crude oil needs to be processed by the refineries, then shipped to the gas station, and each of them, all these are intermediate, and this is the final one. If we value this plus this plus this plus this, we are double counting. Double counting. And double counting is not correct way of measuring. Or you may say that I have a piece of land, okay, land, and the farmer is basically growing wheat, okay, and then the wheat goes to meal factory and it becomes flour, and the flour goes to the bakery, and the bakery is basically selling the bread to customers. So it's the bread which is final goods. Flour is intermediate, and the wheat in the immediate way from the farmers is not usable by the final product is the bread. Sometimes we say a portion of this is coming to the bakery and some of them goes to the retailer. Some of the wheat directly goes here. So you can basically say that, oh, it's not entirely in series, like crude oil entirely goes to the next stage. But sometimes here we have partially going, partially not going. Okay, so separation between final and intermediary products are difficult. This separation is very challenging, but Simon Kuznets and thanks to them we have a value added approach which makes it piece of cake. Value added approach is helping us to make this distinction easy. Okay, so bear with me, I'm going to explain how this works. So I already break down the definition by saying that market value and final goods and services and within a period of time and within a country. So I explain all of them, and I guess now the GDP is easier for you to understand. So final goods and services was a keyword. It is goods and services for the final use. Now we know the final use. We are not going to be using for producing something else. It should be used and for the sake of consumption. And so we have to, the intermediate are used for making something else. So here the value added is defined as the following. If a firm is using its labor and capital and materials or resources, is also buying intermediate goods from others. Okay, so this may become another materials such as wheat in the meal factory or crude oil for the refineries. So this is buying intermediate from the previous stage. So the previous stage is made this. So this is firm 1 and this is the firm 2. So the value added is that he would sell the sale value of its product. So we know that the dollar value of here, and he would also know, the firm too is knowing that how much dollar value he has purchased the intermediate. So the value added is the difference between sale value dollar minus the dollar of the intermediate. What they purchase, subtracted from this, and of course then if the payment to them, including the entrepreneurship, this minus that, it's paid to all the factors of production, not the profit, all the factors of production. So you can say that the value added is actually the payment to the factors of production, workers, machines, and the resources which are used in this stage. Of course, the farmer who is basically using land, labor, capital, the first stage, or the crude oil is going to be exactly equal to, because they are getting it from the nature. So there is no intermediary things used at this stage. They're all factors of production. So the first stage, the value of the intermediate is going to be equal to the value of the payment to the factors of production. But in any other stage 2, stage 3, it's going to be sale value minus the value of the intermediate goods. And this is helping us to measure the GDP easier. So in calculating the GDP, we can sum up the value added at each stage. So instead of saying that the GDP of a country is the price of commodity I multiplied by the quantity of the final goods in that period and sum it over this, we would say that it's easier to knock the door of every firm and say how much you have made value added. And we have J factories, 1 from to K. So we ask each firms produce inside the country. This is easier to follow, right? And we ask them how much each firm has created value added. And if you add them up, the sum of the value added is going to be equal to the final products. Why Richardson and Kuznets said that this is a right way. So in order to explain that, I stick to the example which I gave for the crude oil, because none of them is being used by the final users. No crude oil, no petroleum product which is out in the gate is sent out from the refineries. No consumers goes to pick up directly from the refinery. They have to wait until it's been delivered by the shipment to the gas station. Okay, so it's a series. It's entirely goes. So there is no intermediaries. There's no final goods from these ones. So if we pick up this example, we can prove that the total sum of value added is going to be exactly the value of the final goods. Okay, final commodities. And this is a slide prepared for that. Okay, at first stage, so in our production we have 4 stages: oil drilling, refining, shipment, and retail. So we have 4 firms in the country. They are working in a vertically integrated process. So let's assume that the oil, for every liter, the value of it is $3. So how much value added in the first stage? Because this is the first stage, the value added is going to be exactly $3, because they haven't used any intermediary. This is basically gift of the nature. The value they create is gonna be the value added. In the second stage, the refineries is buying it for $3, but they do the process of separating the different petroleum product cuts, and they sell each liter of petroleum products for $3.3. So this is the sale value, that is the intermediate value they use. The subtraction of them is become the 30 cents for every unit of their product. So the value added in the second stage is the sale value minus the intermediary. And then shipment factories, these are the trucks or the pipelines which buy from the refineries for $3.30 and sell it to the retailers for 3.6. So the subtract is going to be the value added here, value added. And ultimately the gas station, the retail, buys it from the trucks for every liter, the 3.6, and they sell it for $4. So this $4 is actually the sale value of the petroleum products to the customers. So this is, there is no more stage. Maybe the taxi drivers buys it for $4 and they deliver the service. That's a different story. But we are referring to the value of all petroleum products which is being produced. So it should be the one which is the final. And magic. If we do sum the total value of them, it's going to be 0 and 6 plus 3, 9. And this is basically 7, 10, 13. If we say this is the total value. But remember, this was series and the final product is this one. Only the last part is the final product. And imagine that what is the total summation of the value added. The value added is 0, 0, 0, 0. 3, 3 is plus 4 is 0 again. So this gives 1 on the top of this 1. And this is exactly $4. So the total summation of the value added goes from stage 1 to 4 is exactly equal to the value of the final product, which is the petroleum product purchased by the final users. So this is a proof that the value of the final product is the total summation of all value added. The reason that this is hypothetical numbers, but it helps to prove that this is the best way of doing. Instead of counting that how much of it's been done for as the final, how much of it as, you just do a survey and knock the door of the firms in all the stage and ask them to give you the value added they have created. And by adding them, it's gonna be given you. So if you go to the National Accounting of Oman, there is the value added approach. It says that how much is produced in oil and gas sector, how much is produced in the manufacturing, how much it's produced by the agriculture, these are the food, how much it's in the services, and then you add them all. So these are added up, and this is going to give you the GDP with the value added approach. I have posted the latest annual report of Central Bank of Oman, which is exactly give you that how much the GDP of Oman is. So please go and read, and you will be understand now better that the value added approach is by the sector. So how much each sector have created the value added, and by adding them up, you will get the GDP of the country. So this is one way of measuring, but we have two more ways of measuring the GDP. In this way, make no mistake, you should not count on the used good. So if you're buying a book, if it is new, it is going to be in the GDP. If it is used book, like from second-hand shop, that is not the GDP. And the paper transaction are not producing anything. There are some people who buy from here and sell it to other. The service they provide should be counted, but the product not. Like if you buy a second hand in OLX website, OLX, a second hand car, or any item, or from eBay, these are not going to be counted in the GDP. But if you buy a new one, that is in the GDP. So the GDP is counting the goods and services which is produced inside that year. So that is why the used commodities are not the GDP, or the paper transactions are not in the GDP. The distinction between GDP and GMP, this is also interesting. I already told you that there are several ways of measuring the aggregate output, and GDP and GNP. What is the difference? D versus N. D versus, I already told you the difference actually. This is, let's say there is a Omani refinery in India. Okay, the production of this is inside the GDP India, but the production of that is inside the GNP of Oman. And there is an Indian company which is producing inside Oman. This is inside the GDP of Oman, but it's the GNP of India. Okay, so that is the difference. And how we can basically make a distinction? It is easy. We have a national accounting system. We would say that the GNP is the GDP of that country plus recipient of, I use the Oman, okay? Oman. So we know the GDP of the Oman, and then we look the money which labor factors of production Omani is earning outside Oman. So the refinery in India, actually it's receiving some money and it's gonna be in our national income. And then we have to subtract the payments to non-Omani factors of production. So if the workers are Indian, he receives the salary and he takes the money back to India. So those money should be subtracted. The payments to non-Omani or non-citizens factors of production should be deducted from, let's call this one R and this one P. So the formula would be the following. The GNP of a country is the GDP plus the R minus the P. And make, sorry, this is the GNP. Now you know the difference between the N and D. Okay, but the G and G are the same. Later we are gonna make a distinction between G and another N, which that N is not net, it's not national, it is net. So this is gross, and this is also gross. And later we're gonna make a distinction between net versus gross. Okay, so we did make the distinction between national versus domestic. Later we're gonna do also this. So before I go to the part 2, I should say that there are two ways of measuring the GDP, two more ways. So number one was the value added, which we have already told you. And there are two more ways. The number one and number two is called expenditure approach and income approach. So if the output is going to be the income paid to the factors of production, okay, so we may say that actually every dollar creating income to some is becoming expenditure to some. So expenditure, aggregate expenditure and aggregate income should also be equal. So one way is to, just like value added, we knock the door of the firms and say how much the value added you make. We may ask the people that how much you have spent. And this is the expenditure approach. Or we knock their door and says how much you have earned from your factors of production which you own, like how much labor you have, how much salary you have received, how much you have made, sold your capitals, and how much you have rented your properties or resources you have. If we add them up, that is the aggregate income. If we add up how much they have spent, it's called expenditure approach. So bear with me. In the part 2 of the chapter 6, we're going to explain the distinction between income approach and expenditure approach. So I stop it here as the part 1 of the video, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.